I want to tell you about the last solo trip I ever took, and I want to start with the part I still can't explain, because if I start anywhere else, you'll think this is an ordinary travel story, and it isn't. 3 weeks ago, I checked the guest log at a small coastal inn in the Pacific Northwest, a place I had booked on a whim in a town so small it didn't have a single traffic light. And my name was already written in that log in handwriting that wasn't mine. Dated 4 days before I arrived. My name is Mara Voss. I'm 34. I work as a freelance travel photographer, and I have been traveling alone since I was 26. I tell you this because I need you to understand that I am not someone who spooks easily. I have slept in bus stations in countries where I didn't speak the language. I have hitchhiked through mountain passes at night. I know how to read a room, how to read a stranger, how to know when a situation has turned. That instinct is the only reason I'm alive to tell you this. And it's also the reason I almost didn't believe what was happening to me until it was nearly too late. If you're the kind of person who travels alone, who chases quiet places and empty roads because the silence feels like freedom instead of danger, I think you're going to feel this story in your chest before it's over. And if you like stories that live in that space between real fear and the fear we build for ourselves, this channel is where those stories live every week. So if that sounds like you, go ahead and subscribe to Eerie Atmos X now, because I don't think you'll want to miss what comes next. The trip started simply enough. I'd been in Portland for a magazine assignment that fell through at the last minute, and rather than fly home early, I decided to do what I always do when a plan collapses. I rented a car and drove north along the coast, no itinerary, just a rough idea that I'd follow Highway 101 until I got tired of the ocean, which has never actually happened to me. I stopped in small towns. I photographed lighthouses and fog banks, and the black rock formations that rise out of the water like something ancient trying to surface. I stayed in whatever motel or bed and breakfast looked interesting when the lights started to fade. That's how solo travel works when you do it right. You let the day decide the night. The first town where I noticed anything strange was called Holloway Bend, though I won't swear that's its exact name, because I've since had reason to wonder if half of what I remember from that week is even accurate. It was a fishing town, maybe 600 people, built along a harbor that smelled like diesel and salt and something faintly rotten underneath, the way old docks always do. I checked into a guest house run by a woman named Enos, a converted Victorian with narrow hallways and a staircase that groaned no matter where you stepped on it. She gave me a room on the second floor, overlooking the harbor, and she mentioned, almost as an afterthought while handing me the key, that another solo traveler had checked in the day before and left that same morning. A man, she said, quiet, paid in cash, asked a lot of questions about where the coastal trail connected to the highway. I didn't think anything of it. Solo travelers aren't rare on that stretch of coast, especially in the shoulder season, and cash payments aren't exactly a crime. I photographed the harbor at sunset, ate dinner alone at a diner where the waitress called me hon in a way that felt like the first kind thing anyone had said to me in days, and went to bed early, lulled by the sound of rigging clanking against masts down in the harbor. Woke up at around 2 in the morning to the sound of the staircase groaning, not once the way it would if someone were simply walking up or down, but slowly, deliberately, the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying very hard not to make any sound at all, and failing because the house won't let them. I lay still and listened. The groaning stopped just outside my door. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing that's kept me sane since this happened. It didn't stop near my door. It stopped exactly outside it, the way a person stops when they've arrived somewhere on purpose. I didn't hear it try the handle. I didn't hear breathing or a voice or anything you'd expect in a story like this. I heard nothing for almost 4 full minutes, which I know because I watched the numbers change on my phone, too afraid to move, my heart going so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I heard the stairs groan again, descending this time, at the same unnervingly careful pace, until the sound disappeared into the rest of the house. In the morning, I told myself it was another guest, disoriented, maybe looking for the bathroom in an unfamiliar layout. Ines told me over coffee that there had been no other guests that night. I had the only occupied room. I laughed it off in front of her, the way you do when you don't want a stranger to see you rattled. But I checked twice that the window latch was secure before I went out to shoot the morning light, and I found myself glancing at every car that passed me on the coastal road for the rest of the day, which is not something I usually do. Before I left Holloway Bend, I walked the coastal trail that ran behind Innes's guest house, partly to photograph the tide pools, and partly, I think now, to prove to myself that the previous night hadn't rattled me as much as it had. The trail cut along a low bluff above the water, wind coming off the ocean and long, steady pushes that made my jacket snap against my arms, gulls wheeling overhead with that thin, complaining cry they make when the weather is about to turn. About a quarter mile in, I noticed a flattened patch of grass just off the trail, tucked behind a wind-bent shrub, angled in a way that gave a clear, unobstructed view straight up at the guest house's second-floor windows, my window among them. Scattered in that flattened grass were 4 cigarette butts, all the same brand, none of them weathered enough to have been there more than a day or two. I told myself hikers rest anywhere, that a view of the water was reason enough to sit there, that I was building a story out of nothing more than trampled grass and someone else's bad habit. But I photographed the spot anyway, the angle, the sight line to my window, because some old instinct in me refused to let it go unrecorded. And looking at that photograph, now, months later, I don't think I was building anything. I think I was finally starting to see what had already been built around me. I want to pause here and tell you something about traveling alone that people who've never done it don't always understand. When you're alone, your own mind becomes the only witness to everything that happens to you. There's no one to turn to and ask, "Did you hear that too?" There's no one to tell you you're imagining things, and there's no one to confirm that you're not. That isolation is its own kind of vulnerability, one that has nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with how quickly your certainty can start to erode when you're the only person keeping track of what's real. I left Holloway Bend that afternoon and told myself I was simply moving on with my trip, not running from a sound on a staircase. I drove south to the next town, a place called Corwin Point, and it was there that the day took its second turn. I stopped at a general store to buy water and a map of the coastal trails, and the man behind the counter looked at me for a long moment before he rang me up. "You were in Holloway Bend," he said. It wasn't a question. I asked how he knew that, half expecting him to say he'd seen me on the road, or that Innes had mentioned me, small towns being what they are. Instead, he said a man had come through that same morning, driving south just like me, and had asked whether a woman matching my description had passed through yet. Dark hair, he'd said, a gray car, a camera bag. The description was accurate enough that my stomach dropped somewhere around my knees. Did he say why he was asking? I said, trying to keep my voice level. The man behind the counter shrugged, in the particular way people shrug. when they've decided a question isn't worth the effort of an honest answer. Said you were a friend of his. Said he was trying to catch up with you before you left town. I don't have friends who would be driving the back roads of the Oregon coast looking for me. I don't have an ex who would do that either, not anymore. Not in the 4 years since I ended things with the last person who might have qualified. I paid for my water, got back in my car, and sat in the parking lot for almost 10 minutes trying to decide whether I was overreacting. I want to be honest with you about that 10 minutes because I think it's the most human part of this whole story. I talked myself into believing it was a coincidence. I talked myself into believing that a man asking about a woman with dark hair and a camera bag could describe half the female travelers on that highway in October. I told myself this because the alternative was too large to hold, and because admitting I was in danger would mean changing my plans, canceling reservations, possibly going home early, and some stubborn part of me did not want to let a feeling I couldn't prove ruin a trip I'd been looking forward to for months. If you've ever caught yourself doing that, rationalizing away a warning sign because acting on it felt like an overreaction, I'd love to know in the comments whether you eventually trusted that instinct or ignored it the way I did, because I think the answer says something true about how we're taught to doubt ourselves, especially when we're alone. I decided to change my route. Instead of continuing south along 101, as I'd planned, I turned inland, toward a cluster of small towns in the coastal range that wouldn't have been on any predictable itinerary. The kind of detour nobody could have anticipated because I hadn't even known I was going to take it an hour earlier. I told myself this was just curiosity, a photographer's excuse to chase different light. I know now it was the first thing I did that was actually about survival, even though I wouldn't have used that word at the time. The inland road climbed through dense fir forest, the light going green and strange under the canopy, mist pooling in the low places between hills. I stopped in a town called Aldervale, smaller even than Holloway Bend. Just a general store, a church, and a scattering of houses along a single street. I found a motel at the edge of town, the kind with a hand-painted sign and a vacancy light that buzzed audibly, even in daylight. And I checked in under circumstances that felt, for the first time in years, deliberately anonymous. I paid cash. I didn't mention where I'd come from. I parked my car behind the building instead of in front, where it couldn't be seen from the road. That night I slept with the desk chair wedged under the door handle, which is something I'd read about once in an article on solo travel safety and never actually done, because until that night I had never actually needed to. I woke twice to sounds that turned out to be nothing. A truck downshifting on the highway, a raccoon knocking over a trash can behind the motel, and each time my heart took nearly an hour to settle back into its normal rhythm, dot in the morning. I told myself the detour had worked, that I had shaken whatever this was, real or imagined, and I allowed myself, for the first time in 2 days, to actually enjoy the trip again. I photographed the church, its white paint peeling in long curls off the clapboard, and the fog moving through the fir trees behind it like something breathing. I ate breakfast at the only diner in town, and the owner, a heavy-set man named Dell, struck up a conversation the way small-town diner owners do, asking where I was headed, whether I was enjoying the coast, how long I'd been traveling alone. I told him I liked traveling alone, that it let me move at my own pace, stop wherever the light was good, answer to no one but myself. He nodded like he understood, and then he said something that has stayed with me every day since. "Funny," he said, wiping down the counter without looking up. Another fella in here yesterday said almost the exact same thing. Said he liked being on his own, too. Said it made it easier to notice things other people miss. I asked what the man looked like, and Dell gave a description that could have fit half the men I'd seen on the road that week. Medium build, brown jacket, nothing that would stand out in a crowd, which was somehow worse than if he'd described someone distinctive, because it meant this person had made himself deliberately unmemorable. I asked if the man had said anything else, and Dell thought about it for a moment before he answered. Asked if a woman with a camera had been through. Said he was worried about her. Said she'd been having some trouble. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second. The way I had to sit with it in that diner booth. My coffee going cold in front of me. Trouble. Not that he was looking for a friend. Not that he'd lost track of someone he knew. Trouble, as though there were already a story being told about me in towns I hadn't even reached yet. A story I had no part in writing. One that painted me as someone in crisis, rather than someone being followed. That was the moment the fears stopped being background noise and became the only thing I could think about. Because if this man was ahead of me, not behind me, that meant he wasn't following my car along the road at all. It meant he already knew where I was going before I did. I left the diner without finishing my coffee, and I sat in my car in the gravel lot trying to think clearly, which is much harder than it sounds when your hands won't stop shaking. I went back over my last few days trying to figure out how anyone could have known my route before I'd decided it myself. I hadn't posted anything online. I hadn't told anyone my plans beyond a text to my sister saying I was driving the coast for a few days and would check in when I could. I hadn't used my name at Eunice's guest house until I filled out the paper registry. The same registry where 3 days later, in a different town entirely, I would find my name already written before I arrived. I called my sister from that gravel lot. And I want to tell you honestly that some part of me expected her to talk me down, to tell me I was spiraling, to remind me that strange men exist in every small town and that coincidence is more common than conspiracy. Instead, her voice went very quiet, and she asked me a question I hadn't considered. She asked whether I'd downloaded any of the location sharing features on my photography apps. The ones that tag images with GPS coordinates and sometimes sync automatically to cloud accounts. I told her I didn't think so. She told me to check anyway, right now, while she stayed on the phone dot. It took less than 2 minutes to find it. A backup service I'd enabled years earlier and forgotten about entirely was set to public visibility, syncing every photograph I took, along with its exact coordinates and timestamp, to a gallery anyone could view if they had the link. I had shared that link once, years ago, with a stranger at a photography meet who'd wanted to see my portfolio. I had never thought about it again. He had, apparently, thought about it every single day since, watching a quiet, patient map of my life update itself in real time, learning my patterns, my habits, the specific way I liked to travel without ever telling anyone where I was going, because he didn't need me to tell him. My camera was telling him for me. I'm not going to pretend I handled the next hour well. I deleted the account. I turned off my phone entirely and drove without GPS for the rest of that day, navigating by paper map like it was still 1995, checking my mirrors so often that I nearly ran off the road twice. I didn't stop until I reached a town far enough inland that I doubted anyone tracking coastal coordinates would think to look for me there. A logging town called Fenner Ridge that didn't even appear on the tourist maps I'd been using. I checked into a motor lodge that hadn't been renovated since perhaps the Reagan administration, paid in cash again, and this time I did something I'd never done before on any trip in 8 years of solo travel. I called the local sheriff's department, not the coastal county I'd left behind, but the inland one, and I told a dispatcher everything. The man asking about me in 2 separate towns, my name already written in a guest registry before I'd arrived, the location sharing account I'd only just discovered. I expected to be told I was overreacting. Instead, the dispatcher's tone changed almost immediately, and she asked me to stay exactly where I was and keep my doors locked until a deputy could reach me. The deputy who arrived, a soft-spoken man named Halverson, who looked barely older than I was, listened to my entire account without interrupting, and then he told me something that made the whole trip reassemble itself in my mind into a shape I hadn't let myself see. There had been 2 other reports that autumn along that same stretch of coast, both from solo female travelers, both describing an unfamiliar man appearing to know their itinerary before they'd finalized it themselves. Both cases that had gone nowhere because neither woman had been able to produce anything concrete enough to act on. Neither of them, he said carefully, had ever been harmed. They had simply stopped traveling alone. I asked him what that meant, whether it meant the man's intent was only to frighten, to watch, to remind these women that their solitude was an illusion he could puncture whenever he wanted. Halverson didn't have an answer for that, and I could see in his face that the not knowing bothered him as much as it bothered me. He offered to escort me to a motel with better security, farther from the coast, and to flag my name in the county system in case anything else came through matching my description. I accepted both. That night, for the first time in 4 days, I slept without waking, though I don't think that was peace so much as exhaustion finally winning out over fear. The next morning, I made a decision that still sits strangely with me, because I'm not sure, even now, whether it was courage or recklessness or some combination the 2 share a border with. Instead of driving straight home, I drove back toward the coast, toward Holloway Bend, because I wanted to look at that guest registry one more time, the one with my name written in handwriting that wasn't mine, and because some part of me needed to understand rather than simply flee. Inez was surprised to see me. She let me look at the registry again without hesitation, and this time with steadier hands. I photographed the page itself, the entry above mine. The one below, the name written above my forged entry, wasn't a stranger's name. It was the name of the man from the photography meet, the one I'd shared my portfolio link with years earlier, written in full in the same handwriting as my own false entry, as though he'd wanted me to find it eventually, as though the whole trail had been left deliberately. A version of a calling card meant only for me, invisible to anyone who didn't already know what they were looking at. I gave that photograph to Deputy Halvorsen. The investigation, as far as I know, is still open. I haven't heard the man's name mentioned since, and I don't know whether that's because the case has stalled or because there are parts of it I'm not being told. The way families are sometimes protected from details too specific to sit with peacefully. I did learn, secondhand, weeks later, that the location-sharing account had last been accessed from an IP address in a city I have never visited, 3 states away, which either means nothing at all or means that whoever this is has resources, patience, and a willingness to travel that outmatches even mine. I want to tell you I stopped traveling alone after that. I haven't. I think part of me refuses to let this take that from me, and part of me knows that refusal might not be wisdom so much as stubbornness dressed up to look like resolve. What I have changed is smaller and larger at the same time. I check every app on my phone now for hidden sharing settings before I leave for a trip. I never write my real destination in a guest registry until I've already decided to stay. I tell my sister everything, every route, every change of plan, no matter how small, because I understand now that the isolation I used to treasure, the freedom of being unaccountable to anyone, is exactly the condition someone patient enough can turn into a weapon. I still think about that staircase in Holloway Bend more than I think about almost anything else from that week. The particular careful rhythm of those groaning steps, the 4 minutes of silence outside my door that I timed on a phone I was too afraid to put down. I've never been able to decide which is worse, the idea that it was him, standing there in the dark deciding whether tonight was the night he'd try the handle, or the idea that it wasn't him at all, that it was someone else entirely, some other presence in that old house that had nothing to do with any of this, watching me for reasons I will never know and never asked to be given. What would you have done differently if you'd been the one standing in that gravel lot outside the diner, realizing that someone already knew where you were going before you did? Would you have turned back the way I eventually did, or kept driving forward the way I did at first, telling yourself it was nothing? I think about that question more than I'd like to admit, and I'd genuinely like to hear how you'd have handled it. So if this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. And if you know someone who loves traveling alone as much as I do, maybe send this one their way, not to frighten them out of it, but because I think everyone who travels solo deserves to hear this before it happens to them, instead of after. I never went back to Fenner Ridge, and I never finished that stretch of coastal highway the way I'd originally planned. But 3 months later, going through old photographs to build a portfolio for a new client, I found something I hadn't noticed before, buried in the metadata of an image I'd taken my very first night in Holloway Bend. A photograph of the harbor at dusk that I remembered taking alone on the guest house balcony. The timestamp was correct. The coordinates were correct. But the file had been opened and resaved 4 hours after I took it, at 2:47 in the morning, from a device I have never owned, while I was asleep 2 floors below in a room with a door that night had no lock at all.